I just want to officially welcome you all to the Andrew Pete Vayda celebration of life. He died exactly a year ago, and I knew it was going to take me a year to be able to put this together. So I am very, very, very grateful to all of you, not just for coming today, but I also want to do a shout out for so many people who helped right after he died in helping me to write the obituary. That was Brad and Bonnie and Seymour, but then many people who I am not even going to write shout out by name wrote their own obituaries and memorials for him. Many people took my dad's research and his books and have been sending them to Indonesia and to different places. We've been giving away his artifacts and are still in that process. So I want to thank all of you as well, and also just all of you whose ideas he has influenced and who are carrying on some of his question-based research and scholarly work in your own work. And I also just want to thank so many of my friends who are here too, who've just supported me in the last year, because as I mentioned before, I don't think I realized what a huge and integral part of our life my dad was, and that may be surprising to some of you who last saw me when I was 14 and maybe didn't have the best relationship with him, but he turned into this incredible family man, and I opened up a lot through him also over the years. So we're going to get started with a slideshow we put together of his life. Okay, so that was by no means comprehensive, but hopefully you saw yourselves in there. There were lots of people that we weren't able to put in, but we at least tried to show some of the highlights of his life. I'm going to put a slide on the screen, which those of you who knew my dad will recognize a lot of the traits. And for those of you who didn't know him, can learn something about him. Okay, so these are some of the words used to describe my dad. When we're asking what he wanted to be called, because he didn't feel like an anthropologist, and a lot of times he had said that if you were going to start another career, it might be as an investigative journalist. But I think he really considered himself an interdisciplinary inquirer. Of course, he's known in academic circles for human ecology, ecological anthropology, interdisciplinary researcher, and committed squash player, passionate foodie. I think the words came up a lot: irreverent, unconventional, funny, unfiltered, and there are probably a lot more too. But I'm going to get right into our speakers, and we've asked everyone to try to limit comments to under 5 minutes because it is, I think, almost 11 o'clock in Indonesia, and I think Indah's joining us from Cambodia, and so we're going to just try to keep the comments under 5 minutes, and everyone will have an opportunity to share. But we're going to start with Seymour Weingarten, who has known my dad through many of these phases, and was one of his absolute dearest friends, and is now one of our dearest friends. So thank you so much for speaking, Seymour. And the next speakers are going to be introducing I'll be introducing Bonnie, but everyone is going to be introducing the following speaker pretty much after that.
I am. Okay.
Hi.
Well, I mean, looking at these pictures are really touching. I just want to say before introducing, talking about me and Pete, how much I like the title for this event, given to this event, because, you know, obviously it's our celebration of Pete and his life, as well as sort of representing Pete's really unalloyed joy in so many aspects of life, ranging from intellectual engagement to cuisine and family and travel, and of course friendships and sex, not necessarily in that order, by the way. As others here will relate, I first met Pete in 1970, just about, when I was a youngish editor at Plenum Publishing Corporation, now Springer. I was in search of somebody to start a journal in human ecology, because I was told, without really knowing very much at the time about the field, that this was the coming thing. Now, human ecology, as I learned, had numerous meanings, and the one with which I'm most familiar, coming from psychology, was really the environment and behavior area. So, for example, some research article might be about exceedingly long and pea green halls in hospitals are not conducive to mental health. You know, rather kind of simplistic stuff, but that's what I thought ecology was. And then at the time, of course, Barry Commoner had an entirely different kind of approach, which he too called human ecology, which was very much a social and political perspective that dealt, essentially with environmental destruction. So I was really quite surprised when advisors, and I would be talking constantly to people in the process of learning about this field, which is one of the great joys, actually, of doing what I do. I was surprised to wind up in an anthropology department. I had no idea, you know. So I met with Dan Bates at Hunter, and Dan recommended a guy named Professor Vayda at Columbia, and I made a date with Pete, and we started talking. He seemed interested, and of course, his view of human ecology had nothing to do with any of the others, but I was persuaded that that really was the way to go, Pete's way. And this was, I have to say, augmented by very enjoyable lunches and dinners at a place called the Mandarin restaurant, 113th and Broadway, where we shared an affection for something called braised pork and spinach. I mean, this is a theme that will continue. And thus began the Human Ecology Journal, now I believe 51 years in, starting in the 2023 volume. Pete and I enjoyed, well, we enjoyed pretty much everything, but food being such a central passion of his. We frequently met for dinners that ranged from, just ridiculously opulent and expensive meals at, for example, Masa in the old Time Warner building, to down and dirty, literally down and dirty expeditions to fairs with the trucks on 9th Avenue. Every year there was an annual foodie fair on 9th Avenue, and he didn't care. I mean, he was into just about anything, as I was as well. It was certainly part of what became a bond for the next 50 years. The only thing I remember, and he ate everything. I mean, I drew the line at something called cold shredded pig's ear with scallion sauce. I mean, I just absolutely could not abide its texture, but for everything else, I mean, we really kind of enjoyed it together. We spoke about it. We reviewed the experience, the food as we were eating. And one time I remember, I'm just recalling this as I'm talking, there was a very peculiar substance at the bottom of a casserole at what was otherwise a really good restaurant. Neither of us could figure out what it was. We had to get to the bottom of the casserole to actually see what this was. And it turned out to be a Band-Aid of all things. What began as and was a culinary experience was also just as much an opportunity to talk and share ideas. And I was really kind of honored that Pete thought of me as somebody who with whom he could bounce ideas off of, as if I was a colleague as well as a friend. So I guess I'll leave it at that. Only to say that, of course, I'll remember Pete from such memories, and also through the friendship with Andi and Juan Carlos and Daniela and Maya, and I hope that we'll have opportunities to share stories about Pete. And now I guess it is my role to introduce somebody I don't know. Ludomir Lozny. I'm sure I have the name wrong. But Ludomir is the currently managing editor and the incoming editor of Human Ecology. Lozny.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wait,
I have my comments on paper, page of paper, so I'll try to be brief and not exceed my time limit. What I'm going to read is mostly comments by Dan Bates with some of my additions. Dan Bates is traveling and apologizes for not being with us today, so he asked me to read some of these thoughts on his long academic and personal interactions with Pete. Most recently, just before the pandemic broke full throttle in Manhattan, the three of us, Dan, Pete, and I, shared a delightful lunch. I guess that's a common theme with Pete at an Upper East Side French restaurant. And while Pete was slowly working through his plate, we discussed his proposed new book project that he prepared for us for the book series that Dan and I co-edited for Springer Nature. Well, the book is still pending; it's not finished. So Dan writes that in many respects, writing a tribute to Pete is challenging for me since he has been so closely identified with my intellectual growth. I met Pete at formal and informal seminar at Columbia as a newly minted PhD in 1971, and soon became part of what some call the Vayda tradition in ecological anthropology. I had read much of his recently published work refocusing anthropological attention on environmental considerations in the context of ecological study. I had been an admirer of Roy Rappaport at the University of Michigan, who had co-authored with Pete an extremely influential paper on the topic, as well as introducing a new generation of researchers to human ecological perspective focus on the study of ecosystems. At one Columbia seminar, I was initially taken aback, but quickly won over by Vayda skepticism on the current explanations by prominent ethnologists of far-ranging cultural behaviors and events as adaptive, whether directly or indirectly affecting population regulations, minimizing conflict, or enhancing dietary balance, which, for instance, included the Rappaport's interactions with manga warfare as ritually regulated. Such arrangements, as Pete stated, reflecting both his skepticism and a sly sense of humor, bore strong resemblance to attributing the absence of elephants to ritual food stomping. Considerable time has passed since then, but Vayda's commitment to empiricism and chain of evidence never vanished. Let me paraphrase some of his comments, which nicely summarize his main argument. He said, we live in a world of complexly interacting causes. Therefore, the notion that there should be a priori privileging of any particular source of causality, be it derived from political economy, evolutionary biology, spiritual ecology, or whatever, should be regarded skeptically and resisted. Just as we reject anthropomorphism in the study of animal behavior, we also should reject the explanation of human behavior as being simply human nature. This approach led him to both elegantly and usefully challenge much received wisdom in anthropology and related disciplines. In the early 70s, Pete and Seymour Weingarten launched Human Ecology, an interdisciplinary journal with which I'm associated for more than 25 years now. Pete drew on his extensive personal network to make the journal a forum to publish distinguished scholars from diverse disciplines committed to problem-oriented empirical research. 50 years later, Human Ecology continues to go from strength to strength and now ranks among the foremost publications across various disciplines. For example, we were surprised to see that Human Ecology is ranked above 3,000 plus journals in medical science, and only just below the journal that is called the British Poultry Science. I think you will agree that this is an achievement to be applauded. For a much more complete and nuanced account of Pete's impact on environmental research and practice, you can do no better than to read Against the Grain, the Vayda tradition in human ecology and ecological anthropology, which was edited by his longtime colleagues and friends, Brad Walters, Bonnie McCay, Paige West, and Susan Lees. I believe they're with us today. In summary, Pete, thank you for your immense contribution to scholarship, but more importantly, your ever intellectually stimulating friendship, and perhaps as it continues to thrive, your journal will indeed come to seduce even British poultry scientists. So, thank you.
So thank you so much, Ludomir, and it's been a pleasure to meet you in person. And we met at the storage shed, and I'm very happy that Ludomir has many of my dad's books, because you certainly had a lot of things to talk about over the years. I am going to go back. Yeah, we're going to go back to the slideshow to look at the program. I do want to mention that we were planning my dad's 90th birthday party when he got sick, and we were going to have a little gathering here in New York. And that is when Dan Bates put together the tribute for Human Ecology's 50th year and my dad's 90th birthday. And he was actually staying with us when he got word of that. And he was very, very happy. He read the tribute. He was excited by it. And then when he was in the hospital, he actually brought it with him, the hard copy, and shared it with medical staff that wanted to know about him because he had lost a lot of his voice. So we're very grateful that he got to see that tribute. I just wanted to go briefly over this program. We have already gotten into our comments with Seymour and Ludomir, but I think I'm not going to be showing the slides before each person talks, but I just wanted you all to see, it's okay, the formal schedule. So we have Bonnie McCay, Cristina Eghenter, Kuswata Kartawinata, Indah Setyawati, and Yunita Winarto are going to be speaking. Then we are going to be showing video clips. Paige West sent a video clip and a video clip of an interview that my dad did, so you'll get to hear him in his own words. And then Brad Walters is going to be speaking, my father's long-term collaborator. Then we're going to go show some family photos and comments from other family members. And then we're going to have an open sharing of comments. I think after I think Kuswata is going to be the third one to speak from the people around the world. We're going to do an open share from people who are in Asia and other places where it's going to be almost midnight. Okay, so with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Bonnie, who is somebody that my father really loved having as a colleague and was very, very, very influential in his work and ideas and career. So thank you so much, Bonnie, and for all of your help in the past year as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much for including me in this really important event of the memory of and celebration of Pete Vayda, which is had to be done, and I really appreciate the way that you've organized this. I first became aware of Pete when I was an older undergraduate in Oregon, and I learned about the idea that apparently came from his brief time at the University of British Columbia, that like warfare, cultural rituals such as the Pacific Northwest potlatches, which I was studying, might have something to do with redistributing population to resources. That was systems thinking. It was exciting and revolutionary. So when it came time for me to apply to graduate schools, going to study with Professor Andrew P. Vayda at Columbia was a top choice. And I arrived in the late summer of 1969 with a full fellowship, which was helpful since I had only about $15 in my pocket. The fellowship came from Pete's grant from the US Public Health Program for interdisciplinary graduate education. And he encouraged us to take as many or more classes in ecology, economics, medicine, nutrition, etc., as in anthropology. The list included philosophy, and my very first course at Columbia was Philosophy of Explanation, taught by Paul Collins, who'd co-authored A Critique of Functionalism with Pete. Later, I also took a course with Professor Ernest Nagel, famous for his positivist approach to the philosophy of science. All great prep for working with Pete. Well, working with Pete did not happen right away for me. Pete had a poor bedside manner as a graduate advisor. He had little patience for his students' insecurities and anxieties, and especially for her trouble coming up with researchable questions. So I was left alone and wandered intellectually. I squandered emotion and energy. I did foolish and stupid things. But when the time came for PhD exams, Pete did exactly the right thing. He locked me in a windowless room in Skirmahorn Hall for several hours, with some very smart and hard questions to answer. I don't remember those questions, but I do know that they were designed to give me what I needed to move on to my doctoral research. That was just one of the many truly brilliant things he did for me and others. So fast forward, in 1974, I'd finished about 2 years of dissertation fieldwork on a remote island off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. My personal life in disarray, field notes worse, but needing a job. Meanwhile, Pete had moved to Rutgers University in New Jersey to help transform an old ag school into a new college organized around the theme Man and the Environment, and full of interdisciplinary departments and curricula. He came as an associate dean looking for faculty and looked for faculty who could carry out this then new interdisciplinary mandate. And he invited me to apply. I was hired to begin in the fall of 1974, the second year of the new school and of a new department, human ecology. Now, as Seymour has already noted, the term human ecology has many different meanings. And there it was particularly confusing because historically in ag schools, it meant family studies and home economics. In Pete's work, my interpretation is that it was intended to be a corrective to anthropology's notion of cultural ecology by expanding studies of interactions between culture and environments to include biology, demography, history, and more. And in fact, though, despite Pete's vision, the Department of Human Ecology's transdisciplinarity was constrained by university politics to just the social sciences, such as anthropology, sociology, and psychology, later with some communication and law expertise. Pete retired early enough from the Department of Human Ecology to miss its fuller transformation into an environmental policy, institutions, and behavior enterprise, as it's now called. Nonetheless, Pete's vision of human ecology was realized in the journal Human Ecology that Seymour and Ludomir have spoken to today, and it's deeply ingrained in the careers of several of us from the department, and especially his Rutgers graduate students, including Cristina, Brad, Paige, and Indah. A well-known feature And now I'll turn to another topic. A well-known feature of Pete's intellectual career is what some might call his flexibility and others his pragmatic opportunism. In any case, he rethought and changed his ideas to a degree almost unparalleled in academia, about which I'm sure you will hear more. In the mid-1970s, I was in on this self-reflection and rethinking big time. Although I was a very junior professor, indeed ABD at that moment, he asked me to help him write a paper for the annual review of anthropology. He wasn't good at meeting deadlines, and he needed somebody to help pull together his otherwise never-ending exploration and accumulation of ideas. So we worked nonstop, pulling it off through 2 days and one all-nighter of intense and focused talking and writing, and we became friends. Influenced by Hazard's work in geography and by neo-Darwinian revisionism in evolutionary ecology, we sketched out an alternative to the quest for complex negative feedback systems linking people and their environments. Rather, we argued for a more direct focus on how people responded to changes in their environments. One of those aha ideas he came up with, grounded in his relentless pursuit of better ways to interpret complicated realities. And another example of that might be progressive contextualization. Well, our 1975 article is just one of several turning points in Pete's long and immensely productive focus on the philosophy and methodology of explanation, aspects of which others here can elaborate. I just want to add here, with extra emphasis, that poor bedside manner aside, Pete was immensely supportive of me and others of his students and colleagues, not just intellectually, but also professionally in the letters he wrote and his work in nominating us for awards and membership in professional societies. Sometimes I kidded him about how cheap he could be, but he was, in fact, extremely generous to those whose work he admired. And so in closing, I'll just say, we're much the richer and a little wiser for knowing Pete, and we offer our condolences to his family. I miss him. He was a dear friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Now we're going to go to Cristina Eghenter, who is in the Netherlands, and she's going to speak a little bit about the graduate student experience.
I'm here. Thank you. And it's a real honor to be part of this celebration, and also an opportunity for me to see faces of colleagues and old friends from a long time ago. It feels like a long time ago. Maybe it is also. But let me read something that I wrote actually to some extent for the Borneo Research Bulletin. I'm not sure whether you saw the light there, but it's my sort of recollection, intellectual praise of Vayda. And I'll refer to him as Pak Vayda in the Indonesian way, because that's most comfortable for me. So Pak Vayda was more than the founder of human ecology as the discipline we know and studied in graduate school. And he was more than a professor, often incredibly demanding of bewildered graduate students who needed time to adjust to his intellectual rigor. He was a gifted philosopher of human ecology. With him, human ecology became a transboundary, an open discipline, drawing on the thinking of philosophers and historians alike, and intent on explaining environmental events. The bare essence of why explanation-seeking questions defines Pak Vayda's intellectual tradition. Counterfactual reasoning borrowed from historians was a sort of methodological safeguard against essentialism. As graduate students at Rutgers University, we were weekly tested with unique assignments to capture the defining core of how social scientists were explaining phenomena and identify the enemies of good explanation, eaten in false dichotomies, a priori assumptions, essentialism, and reification. The written submissions needed to be concise and terse. This is a noun that really, actually an adjective, sorry, an adjective that is unique to his language in my view. which proved to be a challenge for many colleagues, but this ended up being a critical learning point for many of us once we became authors and editors in our own right. I've never known Pa Vayda, the field worker, the anthropologist doing participant observation. However, the field and years of research in Kalimantan transpired from his work and were the backbone of his mentorship of several Indonesian students, later professors and professionals, and other students and researchers who made Borneo their second home. I ended up in Kalimantan for my field research in the early 90s. This was an unexpected and unintended consequence of being a student of Pa Vayda, but one that changed my life. I did not know then that the fieldwork would have led to over 25 years of work, research, life, and activism in Indonesia and Borneo. It was in the forest of the interior and with the communities of the highlands of Abu Kayan that I understood why asking the right questions are key to successful research and transformational change. And I realized the importance of tracing the possible determinants of behavior over time and space, be it long-distance migrations, practices like Tanau land, sweetened rice or pepper farming, or forest fires. Pa Vayda's constant intellectual pursuit of methodological rigor, his endeavor to reconstruct practical reasoning, and even the reinterpretation of his own work in light of his latest thinking, as Bonnie just talked about, are some of the elements that strongly characterize his legacy. I believe that there is an additional, quiet lesson that we can discern from Pa Vayda's work. Good explanations in social science are not just good and rewarding for the intellect. There is a profound sense of accountability inherent in pursuing good explanations. We owe this to the people and communities we do research with, fellow researchers, local experts. We owe it to our students, but also to the decision makers who have the responsibility to resolve environmental problems. Thank you, Pa Vayda. Rest in peace.
Thank you so much, Cristina. I feel that just beautifully captures what many people experienced of Pete, I will call him. I hope Indah is here. I know you're in Cambodia.
Oh yeah, she's here.
Great, great, great. So now we have Indah Setyawati, who I will let her describe her relationship with my dad, but she's like a family member to us and we're very grateful she's here.
All right, thank you. Good evening, good morning, everybody. And Andi, Juan Carlos, and Daniela. I saw you are wearing a pizza shirt. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's lovely. I mean, I always remember that he has this lovely shirt with him for a long time. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Andi, Juan Carlos, and everybody here who inviting me in this forum. And I'm very blessed and then to be invited. And then I don't know, I hear so many things about Pete and I saw the picture and then I have so much feeling. I don't know if I can say something intelligent or not in this event, but anyway, just want to share you that Pete is very, very important figure that may impact so much on my professional and my personal life. I think most of the people here know that very well. And then when I heard his passing, I was so devastated because he never said anything to me in our communication. And then when I hear something from you, Andi, your email, it was really, it's hard for me. So anyway, I'm not, in my professional life, I'm very much different from the participant what we have here. That basically I'm far away from professional academia environment that many of the participants are here. And but for certain the time I learn from Pete, and I work together with Pete, and I'll be with Pete for sometimes since 1991. I think that's where I met. First time I met Pete when he was invited as a professor in University of Indonesia. Certainly, his knowledge, his approach is opening so much of me and many of my colleagues in University of Indonesia. His progressive contextualization research method opened so much horizon, a new horizon as student of anthropology, and then later on to my professional career. Sorry. His knowledge approach, thing that he shared with me, it certainly brought me to my professional career and brought me to the position that I am now as anthropologist in a multi-development bank, which is very rare. That his approach, his thinking, the way of thinking helped me a lot to work with so many professionals, so many disciplines that I need to do for my profession. So although we are going to the different direction, but we always, his impact to me is never left. It is always with me. And I feel that his contribution to the development of applied anthropology that enable us as a practitioner to work with many different sectors and disciplines, absolutely significant. And I believe his approach in the way of thinking is followed by many young anthropologists in the future, because I also have share this kind of approach with my other young anthropologists, and then it's very, very useful for our work and our career. Pete will be always remembered, not only because of his intellectual work and in intelligent discussion and so much great work that he had done, but also because his big heart. He has so big heart that I always feel. And he also have a very funny jokes that make many of them laugh. Very extraordinary joke that some people sometimes cannot think about. And then he has big love to life. And then delicious food that I cannot forget. He always diligently look at the restaurant review every week in the New York Times newspaper, and then just to prepare special food excursion, either in the fancy Upper West Side Manhattan or in the small alley in Chinatown. That is extraordinary of him. It's his diligent work is not only on the academic work, but even for just looking for the food. It's nothing very simple for Pete just to look for food. You always have to be prepared. How just to review anything. So that's what I remember of him, and I enjoy being together with him so much. And so Andi, Juanca, Daniela, and Maya, Pete never left all of us. It's in all of us now. His friend, disciple, and even in the air that we have. So but this legacy is always with all us here. And I especially thank you for letting me to be part of your beautiful family. And I do hope that our relationship will stay continue to many years to come. And I promise, I have a promise with you to make, then I will keep it for sure. So I think I should stop now before I'm going mumbling for hours and something. That anyway, so thank you so much for having me here. Then maybe I will see you soon.
Thank you so much, Indah. That is so heartfelt. And I think it's funny because so many people know my dad as being like unsentimental, and maybe would not characterize him as having a big heart. But I think with people that he was super close to, we were maybe the fact that his exterior wasn't so sentimental and he could be really tough in his critiques. I think maybe that like highlighted how huge his love was and his generosity with people that he cared about. And I also just want to thank you too, not only for staying in his life, because you two had you know, a really important relationship after you were together too, but also just you helped me so much when he first died with all of your reminders of what a life-loving, food-loving, happy, funny person he was. So thank you for that. And I promise you too that we will always be in touch. I am going to introduce now, joining us from Indonesia, Yunita Winarto, who we're very glad to be here and who has been corresponding a lot as well. And we so appreciate your keeping his legacy alive.
Thank you very much, Andi, so for inviting me to be here in a very special event. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. So I'm happy to know you all, especially to some of my gurus also here, Dr. Kuswata Kartawinata, also Michael Duff, and all Bonnie and others whom I read your writings. Yeah, so thank you very much to have me here. So Paige West is not only a guru for me, but he is also a godfather for me and made me a human ecologist. It was a turning point in my career, in my academic life, when I met him for the first time 40 years ago in 1981 during a training on human ecology organized by Man and Biosphere. And it was held in the office of Kuswata Kartawinata, his good friend, his close friend. So at that time, so I met him, and he was, I have to say that he influenced my thought significantly. So I remember the time when he brought us to the field and always asked us, the participants of the training, to find a problem. What's the research problem? Did you find it? So we always asked one another, did you find a problem? Do you find a research problem? That's my problem, to find a research problem. So that's our talk every day. That was very memorable. So I was happy that last year, or maybe not last year, but September 2021. Yeah. So I received his photo with always his smile with Sofyan, another student, another research assistant, my student, and then became his research student, Paige research students or research assistant in Kalimantan during his last visit to Kalimantan. So in his last sentence, answering my email, he wrote, "Let's be sure to keep in touch. Maybe when the pandemic is over, we can even meet again. I would like that." As ever, Paige. Unfortunately, Paige, we will never meet again. But anyway, I'm happy to be your student. And the second memorable event was exactly 1 year ago. I wrote it in my memorable writing about Pete. In one evening, yeah, mid of January, maybe exactly on this date, yeah, 15th of January. I didn't remember. I had a nightmare that woke me up in a sudden. I felt difficulty to breathe and a very heavy burden on my chest. I remembered how upset I was at that time and kept yelling to somebody I didn't know, no, let him come. Why did you do that? Please let him come, please. That was my yell, protesting to somebody who did a sudden cancellation of Pete's visit to Indonesia. So to an event I did not remember exactly. So I was in a surprise when I woke up in a sudden, since I had never had such a dream. Then 2 days later, a sad news brought by Sofyan, yeah, his research assistant, that Pete passed away 2 days ago. Oh my goodness, was that the time when maybe he said goodbye to all persons he loved so much during his life. So now exactly 1 year from that nightmare, I'm very, very pleased to have the opportunity to express my gratitude. So I owe you so much, Pete, for all you did to me and all students in Indonesia. Thank you again, Andy, for the time.
Thank you so much. I want to make a point that I meant to say at the beginning, which is many of you, including our speakers, have written really beautiful and fascinating accounts of your work with my dad and his influence. And my daughter Maya has helped me create a link tree. So along with this recording, I am going to be sending out a link tree where you can read everybody's comments, because I think people have a lot more to say. And I'm so sorry to cut you off, because I feel like I could listen to you forever. Now I'm really honored to present Dr. Kuswata Kartawinata, who is one of my dad's super close and brilliant colleagues. And I am so grateful that he's here. Now it really is almost midnight in Indonesia. So we are going to spotlight you, Dr. Kartawinata.
Okay, thank you, Andy, for inviting me to be present in this occasion. And I wrote a small note on Pete Vayda, I remember. So I dig up my memories, not my notes, just my memories, what I remember about him, because I couldn't find my notes. And also I still have publications, so that's my basis for my notes. And this is, I addressed to him, I said, as far as I could remember, Pete, you are the first professor who introduced the concept of human ecology and applied it in research and practice in Indonesia. I think he was the first one. Maybe Yunita agree with it. I learned so much from my association with you, Pete, which has impacted and broadened my perspective in ecology. I used to be a pure 100% biological ecology, but after I met Pete, I changed quite substantially. And for which I have to thank you, Pete, so much. Pete, we met for the first time in 1973 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, then in Kuala Lumpur in 1974. We attended UNESCO's conference on impact of human activities on tropical forests. Pete, you raised the issue of people's interaction in shifting cultivation, and he presented case studies in Sarawak by Christine Paddock. Dr. Christine Paddock presented that case study in Sarawak. After the meeting, you and I conceived the establishment of Joint Indonesia-US Man and the Bashir research project on interaction between people and forests in East Kalimantan. We implemented the project during the period of 79-84. Then to initiate the project, we traveled to various potential research sites in the remote Dayak land in the Apokayan area in East Kalimantan. At a very young age, Andy, Vayda joined us on a trip to the remote and isolated traditional Dayak village at Long Nawang in Apokayan. It must have been hard for Andy, a young New Yorker, to experience staying in such a village with minimal amenities and comfort. I can understand, Andy, and I still can remember that. How difficult for you at the time. From our visit to villages, shifting cultivation areas and forests, as well as having informal discussion and interviews with the Dayak people in Apokayan, we learned that the Dayaks had a very good and sustainable system of utilizing forest resources. Our findings were confirmed by the result of the studies by our research team, including 3 PhD candidates at Rutgers, that is Cynthia McCay and Tim Jessup, and also Helvasono Sujito. They were the basis for our proposal to develop the Apokayan area as a UNESCO biosphere reserve. In the project, Indonesia and US map, Pete was the principal investigator, and I was the co-principal investigator of the project. Indonesia and the US scientists studied various forest-related activities in collaboration with the Mulawarman University in Samarinda. Based on the interaction studies and Pete's dynamics project, Pete developed a research methodology called progressive contextualization. I think that is the progressive contextualization was born in Apokayan or in Kalimantan anyway. Pete and I went to Paris to present the progress of the research project after 2 years on interaction between people and forests in Indonesia at the UNESCO Conference on Ecology in Practice in September 1981. Our report was well received and claimed to be a true integration of social sciences and natural sciences in research of people's interaction with forests. It was recommended by the conference that the methodology should be used as a model for the research on UNESCO map project number 1, that's impact of human activities on tropical forests. The project on interaction and pest dynamics also supported a formal master's degree program in human ecology in the Department of Anthropology of University of Indonesia in Jakarta. Several participating students later obtained PhDs in human ecology from Rutgers University and Australian University. That is, an example is Yunita Winarto. Non-degree training course on interaction between people and the environment in Cipanas, as mentioned also by Yunita in West Java, was one of the training courses we organized by Man and the Biosphere program. And another 6-month training in research focusing on logging, timber cutting, migrant pepper farming, non-timber forest product collection, and shifting cultivation was organized in 1982 in Kalimantan. Some of the participants, having obtained their PhDs from various universities elsewhere, became prominent scientists and lecturers, and even one of them, that is Dr. Gusti Muhammad Hatta, became a Minister of Environment and later Minister of Science and Technology and Higher Education of Indonesia. We strongly believe that the interaction and human ecology learnings have impacted the perspective of their thinking. The overall results of the research project on people's interaction with the forest were summarized in a paper presented at the 17th Pacific Science Congress in May 1991 in Honolulu and Hawaii. This paper ended Pete's research in East Kalimantan. Since then, Pete was involved in a variety of research in Indonesia, including the integrated pest management in West Java and Yogyakarta, as described by Ibu Yunita. In addition to the recommendation by UNESCO MAB in Paris Conference to become a model for the research on UNESCO MAB project, our greatest achievement of the research on the interactions and pest dynamic and human ecology is our contributions to development of integrative social and natural scientists in various universities that will surely have multiple effects. A good example again here is Emeritus Professor Yunita Winarto of the University of Indonesia, who is presented in this meeting. Our projects have also produced significant results for development planning in East Kalimantan, which may be also applicable to other tropical forest area. Okay, Pete was my colleague and teacher. My teacher, he's also not colleague, but also my teacher, and was good friend of my family, where he often argued and discussed hotly with my wife, Jenny, about many things, including humanities. And I think that's what I can say in this occasion. And thank you. And Pete, may you rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am moved and honored that you are here and shared this with us, and for what the important work that you've done in your life and the work that you did with my father. And I know that you influenced him greatly as well. We're just going to show a quick slide because I know there's some people who aren't familiar with my dad's work. Yeah, we're going to a slide which just talks about his career in broad categories. I believe, I'm not sure, we have a video clip from Paige. As many of you know, he was initially got famous for his work in Papua New Guinea, which we're not really mentioning at all. You saw some.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, here we go. Are you sharing it? Yeah. But he actually dismissed a lot of the work that he had done in Papua New Guinea. And as you can tell by the guest list here today, Indonesia really became his second home and his main area of interest. But he did do 60 years of research starting in 1956. He did library research in New Zealand, sorry, to get his PhD. We're actually gonna let him talk about that. He did work in the Cook Islands, Papua New Guinea, and Indonesia. And here you have some of his teaching positions. And when Brad speaks, he'll speak, I think, about his time at Rutgers, but especially what he was doing, sorry, since he retired from Rutgers in 2002. Great, so we're going to play a video clip from Paige West, one of my dad's friends and colleagues. She really wanted to be here. She's traveling back from Norway right now, and she also has a bad cold. So, but she is sending a message from Norway. So her full testimonial, her full comments will be available on the link tree as well. We're going to start it about 2.5 minutes in, 2:46.
And this is a key thing to know about him as a scholar. He became famous very early in his career for his New Guinea work, but he refused to dine out on that fame. And then he became even more famous for his thinking around human ecology, but he refused to dine out on that fame. He kept moving forward with his thinking and his scholarship. And he was notorious for recanting things that he had written previously, and equally notorious for being critical of people who continued to rely on what he considered his old work and his old and often incorrect arguments. He was also notorious for moving from project to project and drastically shifting his research focus. These two things, first, being open to the fact that you may have not gotten it right with work you did in the past and being willing to admit that. And second, being willing to follow your interest and not getting hemmed in by the assumptions that anthropologists or others should pick a single field site or a topic and stay with it their whole lives. are two of the key lessons that I learned from Pete. Pete also taught me to be a capacious and promiscuous reader. He read more widely than anyone I've ever met, and I believe that one of the reasons that Pete, the Pete of any present, was so critical of the AP Vayda of the past was because he kept pulling ideas into his much larger scholarly or intellectual scaffolding. And he had this incredible way of reading something and then pulling a thread from it into his own work in a way that forced him to undo knots that he thought he had tied up long ago. And Pete had one of the most brilliant minds I have ever had the privilege to be exposed to. In 2001, after I graduated from Rutgers, I moved to Pete's neighborhood in New York City to begin teaching. And over the next 20 plus years, he and I became close friends. This is where I could tell you a million hilarious, infuriating, wonderful, and strange stories about Pete. I could tell you, or I could remind you if you were close to him, about those recycled envelopes that he would dig out of his backpack during every single meal, and how they were full of newspaper clippings, pictures, articles, and other material culture, and how he would lay them out and then tell you what you were looking at, and then tie it all together in connection to his contemporary work. I could tell you about the night a long, long time ago when I and my two best friends from Georgia took him out with us and kept him out till all the bars in New York City closed at 4 a.m. And how he gleefully stuck with us until the very end and was still bright-eyed at Green Kitchen at 2 o'clock, when sun rose. I could tell you about the fact that I didn't speak to Pete for 2 years because he was overly harsh in his comments to one of my PhD students. And I could also tell you about the day that he apologized for that, standing in the pouring rain on the corner of Broadway and 116th Street. And I could tell you about the many, 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 many undergraduate students of mine who he played squash with over the years and who he destroyed on the court. But what I will leave you with is this. My last email from Pete was on November 29th, 2021. In that, he briefly called me up on where he had been and what he had been doing. And then, absolutely not briefly, he asked me questions about the new climate school at Columbia, which he was interested in but already critical of, about my new work, which he was interested in but already critical of. And he then told me about a paper he was working on that focused on the importance of evidence and causal explanation and thinking about people in contemporary environmental problems, returning to something he had talked about and thought about in the past, but doing it in a brand new way. And then he ended the email with, "Love, Pete." And indeed, so much love to you, Pete. I miss you tremendously.
Thank you, Paige. If you watch this video later, I know logistically and in terms of your cold, that was not easy to do. So we're going to show video clips of my dad from a 2008 interview when he launched, when the book Against the Grain was launched. He was at Mount Allison University. These quotes, there's a 53-minute video, which is going to be also shared on the link tree, and it's really great. I recommend it for you. You'll recognize a lot of what he's talking about. I just want to apologize to the intellectuals and academics here because we really took sound bites and they're out of context. So there's a lot of context missing from these, but we just wanted to show him his mannerisms, his laugh, and some of his ideas as he expressed them. So the sound quality, it's going to sound like something squeaking in the background, and I don't know what that is, but it's from the video. So here is AP Vayda in his own words from 2008.
If you Google my name, you'll still find that I'm giving credit for views that I haven't held for about 40 years. I was a pre-law student in Columbia College, and I went for one day to Columbia Law School and realized that it wasn't really what I wanted to do, and took a lot of anthropology courses, and that decided me on going into anthropology. Well, I think I was looking for some big ideas that would explain the world for me. I was 24 at the time. I got the PhD. And I was pleased by that because I wanted to get away from the university. So I got a grant to do field work in the Cook Islands with the initial idea of comparing society and culture and environment in two closely related atolls, Manihiki and Rakahanga. I was trying to follow the model in vogue at the time where you pick a society and you describe it, you do an ethnography of it. And that's the kind of field work I didn't enjoy then, and I don't think I'd ever enjoyed or ever could enjoy, because I needed more of a specific focus. Well, the theme of relation between people and their environment, which I first got as a graduate student at Columbia, that's remained. But it's taken different forms at different stages of my career. Maybe I should mention I first moved to Columbia in 1960 after my first teaching job at the University of British Columbia, which a job that lasted 2 years. I was replacing other people. And actually at the time I had the ambition of being a kind of journeyman anthropologist and going to lots of different places in the world, but I couldn't resist the invitation to my alma mater. I enjoyed the initial years there, but with the particular interest I had in interrelations of people and their environment, I felt constrained in my ability to work across disciplinary lines, and my disillusionment with systems thinking had begun, and my questioning of the materialist dogma, I should perhaps say. I began to look for positions elsewhere, and the one at Rutgers appealed to me because it was a senior position in what had been the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, which was looking at the time for a new identity as a multi-purpose liberal arts college with a so-called man and environment theme. And then they invited me to join them and to take a leading role in developing that. So I thought this was an opportunity to put into practice some of the ideas I had about working in a more interdisciplinary way, or perhaps ignoring disciplinary boundaries so as to advance knowledge, understanding, explanation in this general area of people-environment interactions. Beginning in 79-80, we had a series of longer-term projects to look at the forces making for deforestation on Kalimantan or Borneo. And those experiences were important to me as fieldwork experiences, which you asked about previously, but these were different from the fieldwork experiences which were directed to getting the ethnography of particular societies. We were trying to answer questions about deforestation, and it wasn't the role of a particular group or society in deforestation, but rather we were trying to understand the various forces contributing to it. That was sort of a significant break from what had been more traditional ways, anthropological ways of proceeding. It also was multi-sided research before that became a fashionable term. We need to have a much more specific focus on the actions which are of interest because of their environmental effects. And then we have to ask, what is the knowledge behind those actions which leads people to take part in those actions, rather than asking what is it totality in some sense of the knowledge system which is behind the actions. The idea is not to go out in the field to test one hypothesis or one theory, but to have a question to which there may be, to which no doubt there are lots of different possible answers. And the more different possible answers you're aware of, the better.
I wonder how you see your relationship with the discipline of anthropology today, and maybe how that's changed over time.
Do I have to?
So I just want to say, in that longer response, I mean, many of you who have worked with him know, and I had a problem with this with the Wikipedia and with his obituary. He absolutely did not want to be known as an anthropologist, but he did say, because he really thought his role and contributions were much more interdisciplinary. However, he continues to say, I just loved his reaction there and his laugh, because I miss his laugh so much, but he did go on to say that he felt that his work was important for anthropologists, and that his anthropology background, of course, had a huge part in, you know, making him who he was, or who he, yeah, I was going to say who he is, but I'm still having trouble with that. I would now like to introduce Brad Walters, who actually is a professor at Mount Allison, where that video was shot. And my dad referred to him as his long-term collaborator. He was so much more and is so much more in my dad's life and work. So thank you, Brad.
Great. First of all, I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to see a lot of faces and hear a lot of voices from some colleagues and friends that I haven't been in touch with for, in some cases, many years. Cristina and Indah, for example. It's wonderful to see you again. And also to see some faces of people who I've heard about over the years from hanging out with Pete and reading his work and reading some of your work, particularly the folks from Indonesia and that, who I knew about but had never met. So it's really been wonderful to have that today. Andy asked me to speak, again, obviously it makes sense that I sort of am the final speaker here in the context of Pete's sort of professional trajectory in life, because I was one of his last graduate students, and I also took a really keen interest in the same sorts of things that Pete did. You know, his obsessions with research methodology and causal explanation, which had long formed elements of his thinking, really became a near single-minded obsession of his in the last 20 years or so of his life. I graduated from Rutgers in the year 2000, and Pete retired, I think, 2 or 3 years after that. And though he kept insisting that he was really going to retire, and this was something he said over and over and over again, those of us who knew Pete knew that that was never going to happen, that he was, you know, he lived and breathed the scholarly life, and he was obsessing and focused right up until the very end. He and I, as I said, clicked because of our interest in intellectually in the methodology stuff and also the philosophical stuff. I mean, I had my very first paper that I published as an undergraduate way back at UBC in the late 80s. I mean, it was a methods paper. So I actually have always had this interest in methods and methodology, but it was working with Pete that sort of cultivated that and honed it in. And it's why, you know, especially as I've gotten more mature in my own career, I've wanted to remain focused heavily on that stuff. It's one of these things I get, the longer you're at this work, the more you appreciate the bigger questions that are more philosophically embedded and so on. So anyways, Pete and I, our sort of my post-grad collaboration was really founded initially over the work that went into the development of the three books that I consider sort of his legacy books, the trio of the Festschrift Against the Grain, which was published in 2008, his collection of essays explaining human actions and environmental changes, which was published in 2009, and then an edited volume that we did on causal explanation for social scientists. And these were all published by Altamira Press. They kind of flowed from one to the other. And I had a fairly significant role in all of those books, directly and indirectly. And through those years, I really decided, okay, Pete is retiring. He wants to cement his legacy, and also the process of working on those books really allowed him to crystallize his key ideas about research methodology and explanation in a way that he hadn't previously. And so it was a real pleasure, well, pleasure at times, but very difficult at other times, working with him through the writing, for example, of the introductory essays for these volumes. But I thought it was a very worthwhile activity, and it was very stimulating for me, although it was also quite time consuming. So my thinking was, okay, this is it. We're going to cement your legacy here. We got the 3 books are done in 2011, fine. But that of course was not going to be the end of things, because Pete continued to stay active intellectually, and he wanted to write more, and he wanted to write more about that in a sort of legacy fashion. And he actually I should mention, during his later years, he also was involved in field work related to the peat fire and forest fire projects in Indonesia. So he did have a stick in the empirical world, although he didn't play a very active role in those projects in terms of on the ground. But I think his very last publication that he's a co-author on just came out this past year, and that's based on the peat fire work. But Pete and I sort of had an on and off thing going on with this in the post-legacy book years, where we started and stopped various collaborative projects, in part because he kept trying to drag whatever we started back into sort of this legacy framework. Like, I want to re-examine and redefine my thinking on such and such issue. And I was sort of, okay, Pete, we've done that. Let's move on. Let's continue the work in this area, but there's lots of other issues that we can explore here. And so it was a bit of a double-edged sword, the sort of legacy obsession of his. It kept him stimulated right up until the end. But it was at times quite distracting. But in any case, we some examples of concrete collaborations that did bear fruit between us in the last few years was he came and joined me in Portugal, where he spent time with me and my girlfriend Mariana and her family, and we organized a session at the International Conference of Human Ecology, and that was in 2018, I believe. And Pete and I spent 4 or 5 days in Lisbon together in a small apartment, and commuted to the conference venue, and in the evenings went out for fine food and so on and drink. And you've all heard a lot about that, so I won't get into that too much. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things, stories about that to give you a sense of Pete's personality and his intensity. He was about 86 years old at this point, so no longer in the greatest shape. His knees were failing. He was having early stages of the heart conditions. And I remember one night we left the apartment and we were going to go up to the street above us, which required walking up about a 200-meter, fairly steep slope. Lisbon is very hilly. And I said, well, we have to get a taxi. Like, this is too much for you, Pete. And no, he insisted, no, I'll walk this. And it was a slow walk, but my God, he made it. And I thought, given his physical condition, I almost, there was about 3/4 of the way up when he was really struggling. I thought, my God, Andy will never forgive me if he dies of a heart attack in the streets of Lisbon, while I'm supposed to be looking after him. But in any case, he made it. And then we sat down and had a great dinner, as we usually did. And it was just extraordinary, his sort of physical willpower, so to speak. But in the same trip, we cohabitated together for a couple of weeks and 4 or 5 nights in that particular apartment. And the thing about Pete was you never knew when the intellectual stuff was going to come out. And I remember one morning I got up and was still, I think, in my pajama bottoms with no shirt on, and went to the bathroom. I came out, emerged out of the bathroom, and there was Pete standing there, arms akimbo, in his underwear and a t-shirt. He had just gotten up himself, and he said, "Brad, we got to talk about something." And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, come on, can't this wait? I just got up. I'm not even dressed." He said, no, we have to talk about something. And then we sat down at the table, and for the next hour, he got into, I think it was the erotic issues of explanation he had been thinking about over the previous hours or days, whatever. But he had, once it was ready to come out, it had to come out. And as a student, collaborator, whatever, those of us who worked with him, we all know what I'm talking about here, which is that the intellectual stuff was never far from the surface, no matter what else was going on. But you had to be there and on the ball to deal with it. There was no sort of, okay, let's save this for another time. No. So anyways, our last actual published collaboration was a piece that we published in Human Ecology, Mechanisms and Causal Histories. And I just wanted to mention, Ludomir presented earlier, and it's unfortunate Dan isn't here, but Pete really insisted that that paper be submitted to Human Ecology. And I think in retrospect, I wasn't sure at the time it belonged there because it's quite a theoretical, methodological piece, very philosophical. And in retrospect now, I know why, because I think he sort of recognized it might be his last publishable article, and he wanted it to be in the journal that he founded and had such affection for. But anyways, Pete remained lucid and engaged right up until the end. He had plans for another book in the works. And as I recall, for example, during one of our last conversations, he was in the hospital, had lost his voice more or less because of pressure buildup in his upper chest, I believe. And he insisted that Andy call me on FaceTime because he had to give his feedback on some papers that I had sent. So Andy was, she was whispering to Andy's ear, and then she was relaying to me these points about the papers that he felt I had to really take seriously, and this was, again, just weeks before he actually passed away. So it's again, remarkable, his physical and intellectual intensity and willpower, which I think was a key feature of this man, and why he had such a huge impact and such a long, productive career. But we became increasingly close over the years, obviously, and developed a very strong friendship, as well as an ongoing collaboration with our shared sense of curiosity, humor, love of food, etc. But when I think about Pete, one thought that's left with me is, I like to be steep on the learning curve. I don't have a lot of patience with just rehashing things. I like to always learn new things. But with Pete, I've worked off and on with him for almost 30 years. And every single time that we met, each and every time we talked or met in person over Skype or whatever, every time he was intellectually challenging and stimulating. It was like this man never got off the steep side of the learning curve. And so if one was, loved learning, loved thinking for its own sake, Pete was an absolutely wonderful collaborator and was a great PhD supervisor. And I'll echo Bonnie's point made earlier, which is important, is that Pete could be real. He had a reputation as being a real hard ass, but when you were committed to him, so to speak, in terms of doing the work, he was absolutely committed as a supervisor. I mean, he was a phenomenally committed. It was clear to me the moment I started working at Rutgers that I was one of his priorities. So, but thanks again for organizing this so much, Andy. And again, it's wonderful to see all these people who I haven't seen for years and who I've never met. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Brad, for capturing so much about him and so much that I miss about him. I want to add that Juan Carlos and I drove up to Canada in August to give Brad some books, and it was really a wonderful and bonding time. We listen to me. We sprinkled, Brad sprinkled some of his ashes in. Can you describe what that place was, Brad? I'm sorry. Can you unmute yourself and just talk? It seemed like a very fitting place to put his ashes, and especially with you.
Pete had spent a visit up here in Sackville, and just on the edge of the university there's a beautiful wetland park with a boardwalk that runs through it. It's absolutely gorgeous. And, you know, it's a place where many people go when they want to clear their heads, and it's quite sublime. And so when Andi brought some of his ashes, and I had to think, well, where would be the appropriate place? And so we found a spot sort of midway out on one of the boardwalks and put them there. And it's in that place is now kind of a added special place for me. So, but yeah, thanks so much, Juan Carlos and Andi. That was wonderful. You guys made the effort.
Was very important, and I've been emailing all of you incessantly. But for those of you who don't know, 6 months after he died, we spread most of his ashes in the Hudson River around 125th Street. And the reason for that is my dad, one of his first jobs when he was in his early teen years was selling soda. He had it, I don't know if he had the soda on his back or his front, but it was in the ferry terminal. So he would sell soda to people. And then he also lived in this neighborhood for most of his life. It was always his home base, even though he would leave for long periods. Okay, we're gonna get into the family portion of this program. So I'm warning you, there may be waterworks. But the first thing we're going to do, Daniela and her girlfriend Barry put together a slideshow, a family slideshow, which shows Pete the Family Man. I just want to comment about the music for it. It's Happy by Pharrell Williams. This was one of 9 songs he sent us that were that he said were good breaks for sitting at the computer. So as most of you know, he loved classical music. He always had classical music on. And for the video show that we did earlier, those were Hungarian classical songs. But here we decided to pick one of the 9 songs that he thought was good for a computer break. And those songs will also be on the link tree. One was a Bollywood song he adored called Om Shanti. So that's really fun to listen to. Okay, so we're going to play this video. It's about 5 minutes.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Well, give me all you got and don't hold it back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Hey, go. Bring me down, can't
Thank you so much, Daniela and Barry, for putting that together. Now we are all going to talk a little bit about our relationships with my dad. I will tell you, we came up with the name Opa when I was pregnant with Daniela. He didn't like any of the conventional options, but he did like Opa, which is Dutch for grandfather. And I just checked with Indah, and she told me that it was also used in many parts of Eastern Indonesia. So he became Opa, and it stuck. Okay, so Daniela's going to start, and then Maya, Juan Carlos, and me.
Okay. So I wrote some notes. I might be looking down a little bit at my notes, and it's a little hard for me to speak, so I didn't write too much, but I just wanted to say a little bit. So I'll just start. So I said, it's hard to put into words what I feel and what I'd like to say about my grandfather. As my mom said, the man I knew as Opa. From the moment I was born, he was nothing but kind, loving, and present with anything in my life, and then in my sister's life once she was born. My mom gave me the title Family Man to use for the slideshow that you just saw, and I find that it was a very fitting title. As a grandfather, Opa was a very big family man. He was always at birthdays and graduations. He took us out to eat at new and exciting restaurants, took us to Broadway shows, museums, and traveled the world with us. Looking back at pictures to decide what to include in the slideshow, I really remembered how much fun we had and how, despite him not always being the most sentimental person, my Opa knew how to make us feel loved and made sure we had a good time no matter what. There was even a picture, I think it might be in the first slideshow, of him when I was little, just putting his leg up like me and being silly with me, which really is something that I remember about him. So Opa was a man who inspired me. He always spoke his mind and did things his own way. When I was younger, I didn't always understand the choices that he made, but I learned to be more understanding and accepting because of him. When I came out to him and told him about my girlfriend who lived in Poland, at first he didn't understand the internet aspect of our relationship, the fact that we met online, we hadn't met in person yet, but he was still excited for me to be in a relationship. So when I took a trip to meet my girlfriend in person for the first time, he expressed how important that was for me and how glad he was that I was doing this, even though it was during COVID. Sadly, my girlfriend and Opa only got to meet once over Zoom, but that alone warms my heart knowing that he knew I was happy and that he supported me just as I am. So there's a lot of memories that I have of Opa, but I just want to end by saying to remember to hold your loved ones close, take the trips to see them, call them, spend time with them. I sometimes would, get frustrated when I had to get on a Zoom call with him. I thought it would be too long, all of those things, but I regret that now and glad that I did take the time to talk to him and spend time with him. You never know when your family or loved ones won't be here anymore and you'll miss them once they're gone. As Opa used to say, lots of love. I love you and miss you, Opa. Thank you for everything. I'm so grateful to be your granddaughter and to have shared 25 years with you. So I would like to introduce the next speaker, who is my sister Maya, who's joining us from Costa Rica, and she'll be the next speaker.
Hello, everyone. As Daniela said, I'm zooming in from Costa Rica, where I'm living right now. And yeah, I have a couple things written, but I think I'm just gonna let it rip, Seeing that slideshow is a wonderful reminder of how I was able to enjoy him and take advantage of the time that we did have with him all around the world. And that being said, there was so much that I was looking forward to sharing moving forward, and so many conversations that I wanted to have. And I felt that this year countless times, especially as I'm branching out and growing up and being faced with all of these major life quandaries and puzzles that I would love to discuss with him. About a month before his decline, just after I'd moved back to New York after graduating from college, we went out for dinner, just the two of us, which I think we'd done before, but rarely just us two. And we talked for hours about a variety of things, and I had a blast. And it's not that I hadn't enjoyed my connection with him throughout my life. And I think like I absolutely had in all the trips, and I always enjoyed it, but there was something noticeably different about this time. And I think it had a lot to do with myself reaching a point in my maturity and intellectual development where I had a degree of interest and desire and patience and foundations academically and argumentatively and so on to keep up with him in a lively conversation for an extended period of time, which I hadn't previously felt so fully. And I was so excited to explore that new type of connection with him. And I felt proud of myself that I could hold my own. And I felt his pride in me and his respect for me and what I had to say, which is kind of a big deal. But I think most of you know, coming from someone like him. And it's something that I carry with me, and I remind myself of a lot, that and something that is hurt a lot in this year of processing the fact that we weren't able to explore that part of our relationship much further. But I still feel actively connected to him in so many ways. And I guess this past year has been a different kind of new phase of our relationship, right? A few months ago, I was passing through the library of this random botanical garden in San Vito, Costa Rica on a visa run. And out of thousands and thousands of books, I happened to pick up Environment and Cultural Behavior that I quickly realized not only featured an article of his, but was actually edited by him with his name on the front and everything. And it was just this moment of like, what the heck? And now, especially in this case, I don't tend to focus on the whole he lives on or he's watching over me or whatever. I actually laugh whenever anyone says that in attempts to be comforting, because I know that he would think that's ridiculous. So I don't think that his spirit was there like guiding me to that book or anything, but it was a magical moment and a reminder to honor and cherish him, and that despite his absence in this physical plane, his presence is very felt, very, very felt. And besides wild coincidences like that, I feel and honor his presence in so many ways, especially by seeing how deeply he has shaped my life in concrete ways, whether it's where I grew up to the travel bug that's been deeply instilled in the foundations of who I am, to just supporting and showing up and supporting me and us in whatever we want to do and allowing me to live this life that I'm currently living as well. So all of that, but also seeing the ways that I see myself in him, or I see him in me, or the things I see about him that I admire and that I want to nourish in myself. My mom kind of mentioned this, but during a visit to the hospital, where we also had some great and wonderful and stimulating conversations, like in those months, right? But I asked him what he identifies with, what he considers himself to be, what he would want to be described as. And that's where he said, the first thing that he said was that he's an inquirer. And that's something I see so clearly in him and something I see so clearly in myself. And it's such an honor to carry that lineage. I also connect with his authenticity. He was so himself at all times, so himself all the time. His curiosity, his intensity, his determination and ambition, his way of accepting and embracing change, whether in his work or in his relational styles, his interdisciplinarity, his dedication to pursuing truths about the human experience and not backing down at the immenseness of that task, but rather finding forms of inquiry to properly hold the complexity of it all. I see all these ways in which we're so similar, and I see all the ways in which we're deeply different. And again, I feel that twinge of sadness that I don't get to engage further with him about how we're similar and how we're different and how those differences might not even be that different. What fascinating conversations those would have been. But yeah, I was inspired by his experience of love, especially in those final months. I could see him soften around the love he felt from all of us. And I've been witnessing him softening my whole life, but it really amped up in those months. And I'm so happy that he got to feel that and that he got to share that. And I like to think that it highlighted the completeness and the fullness of the life that he lived. That he felt fulfilled not only in his academic career and legacy, which was the main focus for so much of his life, but in his interpersonal relations and experience of love and support in that realm. It was clear how much it moved him, and it moved us too. And yeah, I'm honored and I'm proud and I'm grateful to be his granddaughter and to come from him and to be shaped by him and to carry with me him, his love, the memories, and our peculiar ways of being for forever. So yes, thank you all for being here, and much love.
No, Maya, I'm so glad to have heard you speak like that, because we hadn't really talked about it. I know we've been processing it, but you so beautifully described so many things about him and about you two. So it was an honor to hear you say all of that. And I know, like, you being away this year has been hard, but I know that we're also at times processing things parallelly, and sometimes they intersect, but I'm just really moved by your process, and thank you for articulating that. Juan Carlos, my amazing husband, I want to just say that this family, all four of us, were a big part of my dad's hospice team. We didn't realize it was a hospice team, but it was a hospice team. Love and support at the end of his life. And Juan Carlos also single-handedly went through all of his things and cleared out everything in the apartment, because I was too upset to step foot there. But not only that, Juan Carlos has been helping my dad because he had freelance work and I had a full-time job at the DOE. So he actually spent a lot of time with him, doing many, many things, helping him, and they had a very close relationship. So thank you to my family. And now Juan Carlos is going to say some things. We're going to spotlight him. He's in a different apartment for Wi-Fi reasons.
Hola a todo el mundo. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm speaking Spanish. Okay, I want to thank all and every one of you for being here. It's very moving for us, and it's a great tribute to Pete, and he deserved it. I wrote this. I am the easy crying in the family, so I'm sorry about that, but we'll see. Mr. Pete has been an important part of my life since August 1990. I admire his intellect, even if I didn't always understand his academic formulations at the dinner table or his dense books and essays explaining his brilliance and innovative ideas. I feel privileged to have had this fascinating father-in-law who was so irreverent, independent, honest, and generous. We share so many outings, trips, dinners, apartment, organizing sections, doctor visits, and conversations. There are some that I recall with special appreciation. We visit his childhood apartments and playground in Budapest, Balaton Lake, and the small towns where his ancestors lived. The neighborhoods he lived in New York City as a kid, in Brooklyn, and in the East and West 80s in Manhattan, all with his vivid and clear memories and funny anecdotes. He knew Chinatown very well. I think he visited every week to enjoy the food, his adventures, and to buy the fruits and vegetables at bargain prices. He introduced us to great restaurants, especially dim sum, that became a family tradition. I remember our 2 trips to Colombia and his kindness and special attentions to my Colombian family, and the get-together with his Colombian family, Mary, Jack, and Monica. Even though there is so much more to remember and celebrate about him, I would like to close expressing my admiration for the way he lived his life until the end, with a clear mind and intellectually engaged with his projects and ideas. We're missing you. Rest in peace, Mr. Pete. Thank you for everything.
Are we off mute? Okay, thank you so much, Juan Carlos, for expressing all of that and for everything that you did. I know that he was not always an easy father-in-law to have, or he was not usually an easy father-in-law to have. I should amend that too. Okay, so I'm going to read some comments. Some replicate a little of what I said right after he died on my post, and they're a little repetitive of Maya's points. So I'm grateful to be Pete Vayda's daughter. Through his words, and more importantly, his actions, he guided me to question everything, to not be ruled by others or society's opinions, to view normal as relative and even not desirable, and to value experiences over possessions. So now to some of what I wrote right after he died. My father's capacity for growth was moving and amazing. As his daughter, I experienced his transformation from a largely unsentimental and at times insensitive father and inappropriate to one who demonstrated his love for me and our family in many ways. As you heard from Daniela, he always showed up for his granddaughter's important days and events, with me for deep philosophical conversations, help with difficult decisions, daily, yes, daily check-ins, and for hand-holding, hugs, and I love yous, even if at awkward times. When he was sick the last 2 months of his life, we talked about how big and surprising the love was. He asked me, why so much love? I think at the end of his life, and this is echoing what Maya said, he realized that it was his relationships with family, friends, colleagues, and students that gave meaning to his life as much as his intellectual and scholarly contributions. And then just some of the things that I miss most about him, I have to say I miss his physicality, because we actually did become really affectionate. So I see those pictures of him and I just want to hug him and kiss him on his head. But anyway, besides his physical presence and his daily check-ins, which were very solicitous, like he actually was like, I remember one that I shared with the family. It was, I want to thank you so much for the pepper jam you shared. It's delicious. Please, I hope you will bring me more. And I also hope you're feeling better, because he knew that I had been feeling bad. So that's the kind of daily check-ins we would have, if not conversations. I miss his humor. I miss our culinary outings, and especially having a spicy food and drink loving partner. His laugh, our dissecting, questioning, and hypothesizing of personal, medical, and political issues. Most of all, I miss my irreverent, rational, wise, supportive, loving, funny, smart, generous, surprising, annoying, always growing, fun, and yes, sweet and wonderful, super close friend. I was going to say best friend, but he wasn't my only best friend, but he absolutely was one of my best friends. And I think that's why this has hit so hard, is I really, really, really miss my dad, who was my best friend. So I'm deeply grateful to all of you for being here, and I would love to open it up to anybody else who would like to speak about anything. And I'm sorry that we went over, but it just felt like we needed to let everybody speak.
I think this is, we are 2 hours and 15 minutes in it. And it is a little bit a tribute to Pete, because he liked long sections and long conversations. And this is definitely related with his life.
Hello, my name is Joshua Bender, and I met a few of you in different ways over the years. I'm one of the former 606 West 116th residents. I came there as a graduate student working on my PhD in sociology, and ended up with the equivalent of kind of like a dual doctorate at Columbia. After my coursework, I decided to do another sequence in the social work building. And so my training is both in theory and practice, research and activism. I had come as a Californian with my 5-foot longboard, skateboard, and surfboards in my little apartment on the 3rd floor. And I was really intense in my study of social theory under Alan Silver, and I worked as a research assistant to Robert Merton. And I just happened to meet Pete in passing. And maybe I was griping about, I don't know, whatever, not being able to play racquetball, because I had played a little racquetball when I was younger. And he's like, oh, you should play squash. So he put me in some squash games with him, where he quickly dispensed of me. And I got better. And within about a year, I was his equal, and then started to beat him. And then at some point, I was so into squash that I got tennis elbow on my right hand. So I switched to left-handed. And at first, Pete demolished me. And then I ended up beating him, and he didn't want to play squash with me any longer. But more importantly, we became friends. And it turned out that I didn't know of Pete's huge legacy, but I began to talk to him about my interests in social theory. Traditionally, in the social sciences I was exposed to, there were sort of 2 camps. You have a theory and you sort of collect data to dispute or enforce that theory or modify the theory, or you work inductively. You have some data and you build up to a theory. And I had said to Pete, look, I love theory. I'm sort of a Weberian akin spirit. And yet I'm really not interested necessarily in doing methodology that comes from a theory. I want the story to emerge, whatever that story is. And it may even be a non-theory story. And he was excited about that because in his work of eventmentalism, he was using different language to express much of the same ideas. And he said, Josh, look, why don't you become a rapporteur for kind of a seminar of folks in my field at Columbia? I think you would enjoy it. And so Brad, I don't know if you remember, but I met you and a number of other folks there at the seminar where I would facilitate. And every so often I would say a strong Weberian point. I would say, well, Weber's not so deterministic. If you look at this, this, and this, I studied under Günter Roth, I had all these references. And it was really exciting intellectually. And when I finally finished my sort of dual doctorate at Columbia, at some point, I began to work on a book about 3 or 4 years ago, an intellectual biography of Dr. Alex Norman. And I'm just about finished with that right now. I'm about a chapter away, give or take. And I reached out to Pete a couple of years ago, and we've always been in touch. And Pete's always given me stuff to look at and to edit and to reflect with. And I said, Pete, I'd like to do a book about you in the same way that I'm doing it on Dr. Norman. And he said, well, I'm working on these projects and let's talk about it. And then with pandemic energy and time sort of being amorphous, I got caught up in stuff and it's on my mind. This is my next book, is to write a book with Pete about Pete and get input from Brad and others on the kind of methodology that I use that is very personal and contextual and asks a lot of questions about how we ask why. That kind of skepticism, that inquiry focus, that multidisciplinary way of approaching things. And just last week, I got this devastating email from Andy. And first, when I first read it, I thought that Pete had just passed away. And then I realized it had been a year. And, in very Seinfeldian language, I felt very verklempt and troubled and sad. And all these emotions came up. And I was thinking about Indah's comments about being devastated, and I have felt devastated for several days, and I'm just now getting into the space of celebration and connecting with you all. I'll just say one, I hope within the time limit, one brief sort of theoretical point. When I was doing my doctoral coursework in statistics for the sociology PhD, we were supposed to analyze data and have a theoretical orientation. And I said, I get that. And the idea of being parsimonious or having the least amount of variables to explain something. I said, but I want to run a routine, an auto-regression analysis, which essentially was kind of a precursor or a co-cursor of artificial intelligence. The idea of let me see what the data spits out for getting my theoretical frame. And I've been involved now in artificial intelligence modeling and health efficacy and things like that and large data sets on the conceptual and logistical building model for some time. And again, I saw an affinity between myself and Pete and others who, as I understood or interpreted my dialogues with Pete, were to not bias in advance and to look for these chains, if not causality of association, and see where it would take us. And of course, for me, as someone who's both a sociologist and a social worker, ultimately I'm interested in some kind of social growth, positive humanistic efficacy. And I'll just say one last thing about Pete, that I loved listening to him and dialogue with him, because there was always going to be like an ironic punchline. you know, how comedians will like lead you somewhere and they'll take you to like some surprise turn. I would anticipate that from Pete. And sometimes I would try to beat him to his own punchline because that's just the nature of how I felt tickled by him. Anyway, he was a dear friend. And I think I would put in the present tense is in kind of that French, you know, conditional grammar. He's a good friend. And I hope to keep drawing upon his thinking and influence as I get to know some of you through your writings and hopefully in future conversations. I hope I haven't dragged on too long. Most importantly, I'm sending my love to Pete's family, both formal and informal. Shalom and mahalo.
Thank you so much, Josh. I just want to say to everybody here, when my dad first died, I put together a list, an email list, but I'm sure there were oversights. So Josh, you were definitely an oversight. I know he was so thrilled to have you in the building, not just as a squash partner, but as someone who became a good friend. And so I think we're all learning that his effect was like bigger than maybe we realized when he was alive. But so I only recently was able to go through his emails, and that's when I was able to inform some more of you and tell you about the Zoom. So I just want to apologize for the oversight. And if you know people, when I send out this link in the recording, I'm sure that I've missed people. I mean, I think I got most people from his emails, but he was close to people, and there may be people who want to speak who haven't talked to him in many years. So if you know someone to share the news with, please do, and please don't take it personally. I just wasn't able to look at his email until very recently. I just want to do a shout out for Pimpar, yes, who is one of my dad's closest friends and has become a close friend of ours. She put something in the chat, but Daniela is going to read it.
I'm going to read it and then let Jack speak. Give me one
Jack,
second.
his nephew, yes.
Yes. So, yes, Pimpar wrote, "I am so honored to be here. Pete was my best friend. He was my only friend that I felt very comfortable to talk. When I felt depressed, he always gave me a very good advice when I asked him. I miss his great sense of humor and going out to restaurants. He is missed and loved tremendous." And thank you so much, Pimpar, for everything you did for him and for being there at the very end of his life. It was very comforting to have you right there by our side. So I'm going to, Jack, would you like to speak?
Hi, my name is Jack Goldstein. I'm the son of Ana Maria Goldstein, who passed away, will be 2 years next week. She was born Ana Maria Vayda. So she was Pete's half sister. They never grew up together. They only met a few times throughout a lifetime, but every time for them was very meaningful, very intense. And since the advent of internet, they had pretty much daily communication, always challenging, intellectual, stimulating. And it was for me too, because those conversations trickled down to me fairly often. And I also had the chance to have a few moments with him, again, not many, but very meaningful. Came to my wedding and had the chance to chat with him, not at length, but deep. They were always deep, deep conversations that I really got to appreciate. So I have huge admiration for his work as a professional. Although I have to say that even though I love reading, I've thus far not been able to digest his work. It's beyond, but from what I read and what I hear from colleagues, an admirable person. I enjoyed very much his way of being unique, you know. And I'm also very happy that I was able to express my gratitude to him and to explain them why. Because it wasn't just a simple sense of gratitude. It ran very deep, and because of personal things, because of the example that he set for me, but also because of the way that he handled a relationship with his sister, his half sister. And I must say that after everything was said and done, in decades that they shared together, mostly online and by phone, they did not have a relationship of half siblings, but at least I know that for my mother, he was a brother and a half. And for that, I will forever remain grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack. I know it was a great source of meaning for my dad to be your mom's sister and to be your uncle. I'm sorry, brother. Yes, he was a man. So what I was going to say is, in the slides that you saw, I believe the only blonde woman he was pictured with was his sister. So both the bare-chested guy in the beginning, I think, was the first. Someone's holding it up. That's the first time that they met. Juan Carlos is holding it up.
And Daniela.
Yeah, there they are together the first time they met. And then later pictures as well in his life. In his life showing was also him. I have to say, in thinking about my dad's life, I of course feel a huge sense of loss for your mom. And I miss her every day. She had a huge influence in my life, and they led very different lives, but they were similar. Oh, there we go. Great. They were similar in terms of being authentic, true to who they were, questioning, always learning, and in the end, valuing family, which I didn't think I would have said about my dad 30 years ago, but they both valued family and each other tremendously. So thank you so much for being here. I will also say Jack is an absolute world traveler. Like, I don't even know what the denomination is. You blew my dad away in terms of traveling, but he has that special designation. What's it called? You can say it. What is your traveling status?
Crazy.
Okay, besides crazy, how many countries are you up to?
UN about 140.
Yes. Okay. Great. Great. So thank you for that. Anybody else would like to speak? Okay.
I think so. There's a few very nice comments in the chat. I don't know if you want to repeat them. People can read them.
Yeah, I'm so glad to see Olga. Thank you for coming. Yay. He was one of a kind. That is true.
I don't do this well. It's Margie Nolan.
Hi, Margie.
But I'm going to regret it if I don't say something. I met Pete as an undergraduate when I went back to school as a mature student. And then I got to work with him for about 6 years as he retired before I moved away. And those 6 years and his friendship and his confidence in me and his instruction and just the discussions that had made such a huge difference in my ability, in my confidence, in my own critical thinking and how I move forward in the world. And I do appreciate it. And I do know that he talked in their phone calls in those last years. As Brad said, he was very much involved in thinking about his legacy and putting together the papers. He went from a book to essays and he kept paring it down. But listening to you, his family, and listening to the way you deal with him, I think you're his true legacy. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Margie. I think you speak beautifully and so heartfelt, and you are another really important example of somebody that we didn't show pictures with because I couldn't find any pictures of you two. I wanted to find one, but I didn't have any pictures of you two. And I didn't really have a way of working you in, but I know that you were absolutely, absolutely huge in his life, both academically and personally. And we thank you so much. And I do feel like you're part of the family too. So hopefully we will get to catch up in person soon. Okay, great. Okay, so I think we're going to end. I'm not going to end the session yet, but you're all free to go because I'm afraid I'm going to lose the comments or the recording. So we will officially officially end this session with much, much gratitude, and be on the lookout for the link tree, which is going to have people's more expanded comments and links to the video productions that we made. We're still uncovering things, and I look forward to being in touch with many of you to see if you would like to be the home of these items. But thank you so much. And I want to also just thank again my friends here, because I've had a really hard year with this. I was really, it's funny to say you're blindsided when your 90-year-old father dies, but we were kind of blindsided. I think a lot of us thought that he was going to be one of those people to live into his hundreds. And I just have really appreciated your support, and I really, really appreciate you keeping his legacy alive in any way that it has impacted you. So thank you so much.